Hello, I'm Desired500 and this is your presidential fact of the day. Today is Canada Day, so I thought it'd be interesting to kind of mention Canada in today's presidential fact of the day. So that's what I am going to mention. I'm going to talk about how the 18th president of the United States, Ulysses S. Grant, wasn't president when Canada confederated in 1867, but was president when the first Canadian Prime Minister, Sir John A. Macdonald, made his first visit to Washington, D.C. There was a lot of talk between the Canadians and the British about how to strengthen themselves in America, but Grant, he was the expansionist. He thought about annexing Canada. Hello, I'm Desired500 and this is your presidential fact of the day. Happy Independence Day, Americans. Wait a minute. Independence Day is usually on July the 4th, but today it's the 2nd of July. So why am I saying Happy Independence Day? Sure, I may be kind of wrong to say Happy Independence Day to the Americans on the 2nd of July. However, I'm not totally wrong, because there was one president in American history who refused to celebrate Independence Day on July the 4th, and did it actually on July the 2nd, that being John Adams. He did that because the 2nd of July is actually when the people in the Continental Congress decided to declare independence. It was only until the 4th when they could actually get an official declaration. So John Adams thought the 2nd would be massively celebrated, and thus celebrated the 2nd of July as Independence Day for his entire 4 years. Hello, I'm Desired500 and this is your presidential fact of the day. A couple months ago, I made a video explaining how Donald Trump was actually not the first president to run into issues with the law. It was actually President Ulysses S. Grant, who actually was arrested for speeding on his horse and had to pay a $20 fine. On that video, I got exactly 0 comments talking about how Franklin Pierce technically was also arrested for running over an old lady with his horse before he became president. And I just wanted to clear up the room to all 0 people and say, no, that story's not true. It was fabricated much later on after his death. So it is actually still Ulysses S. Grant, with the oldest president to run into issues with the law. Hello, I'm Desired500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. Today is Independence Day. Happy Independence Day to all of the Americans out there. So I'm gonna make my fact about July the 4th, which is actually the birthday of Calvin Coolidge, the 30th president of the United States, who just so happens to be my favorite president. So today is a pretty cool day. Hello, I'm Desired500 and this is your presidential fact of the day. The 6th president of the United States, John Quincy Adams, lived quite an eventful life. He was still in the world of politics when he died on the 23rd of February in 1848. A lot of people were surrounding him when he gave his last words. This is the last of earth. I am content. One of those people at his bedside when the 6th president died was none other than the 16th president, Abraham Lincoln. Hello, I'm Desired500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. Today is George W. Bush's 79th birthday. So I figured, why not make a quick little fact about the want to get this right. I'm going to say 43rd president. If I'm right, yeah, I think I'm right. 43rd president. Okay, let's do one quick fact about him. Something that I recently found out is that a lot of presidents have children. That's a lot of them do. Most of them do. But George W. Bush is the only one to have had twins. Hello, I'm Desired500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. The 10th president of the United States, John Tyler, wasn't supposed to be president in the first place. A lot of people don't know this, but there was absolutely nothing, 0, in the Constitution about what happens when the president dies. Word for word, all it said was, if the president dies, resigns, or is incapable to become or to serve as president, the same shall devolve unto the vice president. There were a lot of confusion. What does that mean? Nobody knew what that meant. John Tyler said, you know what? I think it means that I'm the president. And anyone who addressed him as the acting president or the vice president in mail would get their mail sent straight back to them. Hello, I'm Dazad500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. Well, it's not going to be a presidential fact today, so sue me. I'm going to do a fact today about the 14th president, Franklin Pierce's wife, Jane Pierce. So I don't know if I talked about this when I made my last presidential fact about Franklin Pierce back in January, but when his 3 children died very young, one of them died in a horrific train accident, almost got decapitated right before his inauguration, Franklin Pierce was, of course, very, very sad, as I think most normal, sane human beings would be as well. His wife, of course, was also very sad. So sad that she neglected her First Lady duties of hosting parties and events at the White House for 2 whole years in an attempt to contact her dead son. Hello, I'm Dazad500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. The 30th President of the United States, Calvin Coolidge, did a lot of interesting things and very cool and little known, you don't really need to know things. One of these little things is he actually pardoned a raccoon, right? So this raccoon was like doing a lot of bad stuff, and he pardoned this raccoon and he kept it as a pet in the White House. I think that's pretty cool. Since the Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776, the bald eagle has been a symbol of American patriotism and nationalism, which are basically almost the same thing, but it's become an American symbol. And it very is still. If you put a bald eagle out there in front of American, they will be ecstatic. However, it was not the national bird up until very, very recently. In December 2024, President Joe Biden signed a bill that made the bald eagle the official national bird of the United States. Hello, I'm Dazad500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. Well, today is John Quincy Adams' birthday, the 6th president of the United States. If he was alive, I think he'd be 268 if I did the math right. So that's pretty cool. I decided to make a fact about him. Well, more so his son, Charles Francis Adams. Charles Francis Adams would be a pretty influential figure in American history, despite never serving as president, unlike his father and his grandfather, actually. But, interestingly enough, he would serve with Abraham Lincoln. He would serve as an envoy to the United Kingdom, or another major country like that. I can't really think of it right now. I think it is the United Kingdom, under Abraham Lincoln. And the person he succeeded to get the job was George M. Dallas. If that name doesn't ring a bell, that's the 11th president's vice president, James Polk's vice president. Hello, I'm Dazad500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. Currently, if you can't tell by the massive bells ringing in the background, I am in Ireland, and it's very, very cool. So I decided to do my presidential fact about the very first president who has ancestry tracing him back to Ireland. And that would surprisingly be Grover Cleveland. I would have thought it would have been one of the earlier presidents because they were in England and Scotland and Ireland as well. But it actually had to wait till the end of the 1800s to get an Irish president. Hello, I'm Dazad500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. I was going on a tour around this lovely city of Dublin yesterday, and one of the very cool things that the tour guy said was that there's this bar, I forget the name of the bar, I think it's Irie Bar or something like that, where both Presidents Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton have been to when they went to Dublin. And I think that's very, very cool that both Republicans and Democrats can agree on which bar is the best in Dublin. Hello, I'm Dazad500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. So now that I'm here in London, I thought it'd be pretty cool to make a fact about London. And something that I didn't even know was a thing, which I feel like maybe I should have known in retrospect. I should have known this fact beforehand, but I just didn't because my tour guide on the bus told us. It's that John Quincy Adams, the 6th president who actually married a British woman, was the only president to be married here in London. So that's a pretty cool fact that I wanted to share with you. Hello, I'm Dazad500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. So when he visited London, the 40th United States President, Ronald Reagan, actually went to a massive, absolutely huge store here named Harrods. It's actually not that far. I can probably see it with just my bare eyes. It's not that far from my hotel room. But while he was there, the people who worked there, and this shop, Harrods, is known to be, you can go in and you can get pretty much anything. So when Ronald Reagan went there, he was presented with a whole elephant. Hello, I'm Dazad 500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. It's my final day here in London, so I wanted to go out with a bang. And actually, the 13th president, Millard Fillmore, you might not have known him, and a lot of people don't actually, but one person who definitely did know Millard Fillmore was Queen Victoria. And actually, what makes this story pretty interesting is that Queen Victoria once called President Fillmore the hottest person on earth. Hello, I'm Dazad 500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. So back in 1881, the 19th president of the United States, James A. Garfield, was assassinated, and he died in September, although he was shot much earlier. But anyways, while he was in this recovery process, which took months, it was a months-long process, the very first metal detector by Canadian Alexander Graham Bell was tried and detected on the president. However, they couldn't find the bullet because he was laying on a bed made of metal springs. Hello, I'm Dazad 500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. Not that far out from the American Revolution, an American president would visit Britain. And yeah, he technically wasn't the president at the time, but John Adams was the minister to the United Kingdom under George Washington when he visited none other than King George III. Despite being mortal enemies, their friendly conversation was pretty friendly. Very surprising. Hello, I'm Dazad 500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. Wow, the 1800 election was crazy. Not only were some absolutely incredible accusations being made from both sides, from both John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, but the results were crazy too. This was before the 12th Amendment to the Constitution, which set in stone the running mate rules that we know today. So, Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr, who were running on the same ticket technically, got the same amount of electoral votes technically. So it went down to the House, who had to decide who was going to be the presidential president in 1800. And they went with Thomas Jefferson after 36 ballots going against Aaron Burr. Hello, I'm Dazad 500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. Today is Canada Day, so I thought it'd be interesting to kind of mention Canada in today's presidential fact of the day. So that's what I am going to mention. I'm going to talk about how the 18th president of the United States, Ulysses S. Grant, wasn't president when Canada confederated in 1867, but was president when the first Canadian Prime Minister, Sir John A. Macdonald, made his first visit to Washington, D.C. There was a lot of talk between the Canadians and the British about how to strengthen themselves in America, but Grant, he was the expansionist. He thought about annexing Canada. Hello, I'm Dazad 500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. A couple months back, I made my presidential fact of the day talking about how the 16th president, Abraham Lincoln, was not just a great president, but also was a great wrestler, being in the Hall of Fame. However, I think it's also pretty cool to mention that he was a licensed bartender. This guy is all over the place. Hello, I'm Dazad 500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. The 34th president of the United States, which was the one right before John F. Kennedy, was named Dwight David Eisenhower. Now, he was a pretty interesting character in American history, because yes, he was the president, which is probably your number one in history. Like, you can't really get better than the president. But he was also a general, and a very famous general. He was the general who conducted the D-Day operations on June the 6th, 1944. Hello, I'm Dazad 500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. Yesterday, I talked about how the 34th president of the United States, Dwight David Eisenhower, was the general that launched the famous D-Day invasions on June the 6th, 1944. But what I failed to mention was that if it didn't go as successful as it did, Eisenhower had a speech planned in which he took 100% of the responsibility. That is the type of man that I would like serving as my president. Hello, I'm Dazad 500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. On the 14th of April, all the way back in 1865, the 16th President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, was shot by John Wilkes Booth, and he died the next morning. While that is pretty sad, it left a lot of people wondering, why wasn't anyone protecting him? Where was the Secret Service? Well, the Secret Service hadn't exactly been founded yet. Or was it? Well, it technically was, because the Secret Service was formed on the 14th of April, 1865. You know, the same day Lincoln got shot. While it is an interesting coincidence, the Secret Service was not initially founded to protect the president. It was initially founded to just enforce laws, I guess. Hello, I'm Desire500, and this is your presidential fact of the day. Well, tomorrow I talked about how the Secret Service was not initially formed to protect the president. And while that is true, I failed to mention when and how it was. It wasn't after the next presidential assassination back in 1881, when James Garfield was shot, but in 1901, following the next presidential assassination, the assassination of William McKinley. Hello guys, I'm in a forest, but this is your presidential fact of the day. The 36th President of the United States, Lyndon B. Johnson, was known to be quite the character. So he would often conduct meetings on the toilet so he can whip out his genitalia for the interviewer to see. What a very interesting guy. I would have loved to meet him.